Alright guys, so as you know, we are going to go ahead and talk about antibiotics, and we're going to discuss how Dr. Alexander Flemming discovered them, and that is Dr. Alexander Flemming. And he was a medical doctor during World War I. And that comes before World War II. We're just going to go ahead and erase all this real quick. Okay. So, during World War I, our soldiers fought in these things called trenches. And yes, I am drawing a trench. It is not going to be a pretty trench, but it will be a trench. If you want a pretty trench, you should talk to Miss Keene. She's an amazing artist, and she's also your art teacher. But this is my version of a trench. So, this is a trench, and this is a trench right here. All right? So basically, how our soldiers fought during that time was like, they were like those, how do I explain it? They're like those little meerkats that you see on the Discovery Channel who kind of live in holes, right? And I'm going to go ahead and draw them right here. It's a lot cuter to look at these little fake meerkats than it is to picture humans doing this. It was a pretty rough time. All right. And then we have another meerkat right here. And there we go. That one looks a little off, but whatever. We don't have to. Let's not talk about that. So they used to pop up, and they kind of used to bop up and down and try to shoot each other. So if that makes you feel bad or upset, just imagine little meerkats with guns. And it's just absolutely ridiculous, and it's hilarious. Look at how happy they are. They have Glocks. They're so happy. All right, so they got their little guns, and they're bopping up and down to shoot each other. And we're just going to go ahead and move on, since you know that. Now, while they were in the trenches, they were sometimes in trenches for months, if not years, at a time. Okay? So some of them would get cuts on their foot, and these cuts would become infected. You could die from something as simple as a stubbed toe. What would happen is you'd get this injury, right here, and then bacteria would grow on it, and this bacteria was called trench foot. The disease is called trench foot. The bacteria is called gangrene. It's the same disorder. It's caused by a bacteria. Okay, so let's just go back to this. As you can see, there's a little bacteria on there, and it kind of eats at flesh. So it's going to pretty much do that to the entire foot. Okay? And at that point, it's infected. So you have to amputate. So no, yeah, they didn't have anesthetic back then, so that probably hurt a lot. But if you think that that's it, obviously not, because if a little cut caused that much infection, imagine what a big cut would do, right? So then they'd get sick, everything would get infected, and they'd die, okay? They'd have this huge infection, they wouldn't be able to stop it. It was just a bad time for anyone involved, especially if you were a doctor who wanted to save your patients, like Dr. Alexander Flemming, which we're going to draw to the best of Mr. Sequel's abilities. So that's Dr. Flemming. Look at him. It's our hero of the story. He's wearing his lab coat. It's not a cape, but it might as well be. It looks more like a hat. That is a terrible looking lab coat. Anyway, but he's actually not happy. He's sad because all of his patients are dying, and it's making him feel like he's doing a bad job, which he's not. So he's trying to help these soldiers by trying to find out how to kill the bacteria. So he grows them in these little things called petri dishes. You'd probably seen them in a lab once or twice. And he'd call them cultures. They're cultures of bacteria, right? You might have heard of that if you've ever made yogurt or heard of someone making it. All right, so there are the little bacterias hanging out, doing what they do. And he would try things like alcohol, which didn't work. He would try using things like honey, which have antibiotic properties, but that didn't work, which was disappointing. He would even try things like putting lye on the bacteria, which is always a bad idea because it's bad for you. So that didn't work, clearly. And then he would even try using things like dog spit. And that was common back then. And then he was like, what? My golden retriever's saliva didn't kill the bacteria? I'm shocked. He wasn't shocked. He knew that wasn't going to work. All right. So Dr. Flemming needed to go back home for a while, and I think he was probably getting pretty frustrated at this point. And him and his lab assistant went back to England for a little while, all right? So what happened was his lab assistant, Dr. Forley, was kind of lazy and kind of sloppy. So he left a sandwich in a sink, which he was not supposed to do because you're supposed to keep your lab clean. And he left a sandwich anyway. Yes, this is a sandwich. And it's tomato. I'm not an artist, people. We know this now. This is cheese. We'll put a little bit of like mayo on it. Maybe a little bit of lettuce. Let's put some lettuce on there. Can you tell this is before lunchtime? It's before lunchtime. Spoiler alert. Not really. Anyway, so that's my sandwich, which looks terrible, but that's okay. And that's the culture, which also isn't even really in a circle, but that's okay. And these are the little bacteria. Look at them. Aren't they cute? Aw. All right. They're just going to do what they do, cause disease, hurt people, the basics. So what ended up happening is that the sandwich started to grow some mold. It maybe started on the cheese and then just started to spread because it was a dirty sink. It was kind of musty. It was gross. I'm sure you've seen this mold before. It's kind of a bluish, greenish color with like little gray hairs on it. Please do not eat this mold or rub it on your open wounds. Dr. Flemming kind of got lucky on this one. You never know what the mold actually is going to be. What happened was that the mold would spill onto the petri dish, right? Okay. And it would start eating the little bacteria. Bye, bacteria. We won't miss you. All right. Oops. Hold on. We're gonna try to draw that back. Yeah, that looks great. Okay. So it spilled onto the petri dish and started killing the bacteria. And when Dr. Flemming got back, first of all, he chewed out his assistant and was like, dude, Forley, why did you leave a sandwich in the sink? And Forley was like, I wanted to go home, bro. Got a girl back home. I don't care. But then before Flemming was probably going to fire Dr. Forley, he noticed that there was a space on the petri dish where bacteria wasn't growing, and that the rest of it had been taken over by this fungus, right? This mold. And he said, whoa, what is that? Why is that happening? That's really cool. What's going on? Well, do not fear. I will tell you what's going on. So, it all has to do with how mold digests things, okay? So, let's go ahead and draw ourselves a little tiny mold cell. Here it is. Look at that. Okay? Those are its like brains or whatever. And so with humans, first of all, let's go ahead and draw a little bacteria right here, okay? Let's give it a minute. Isn't he adorable? They're so cute together. All right. Anyway, back to it. So humans, we chew. We kind of eat from the outside in. We swallow food. You know, we use our saliva, right? We have a gut with bacteria and acids and all that. Good bacteria. There are good bacteria, all right? But, fungi don't have teeth, okay? They just don't. And they don't really swallow. They more kind of absorb. And they don't really have a stomach. I don't know if you noticed, but, they have these two little brain things. And if you draw on them just right, now he has eyes. They don't have that in real life, but I think he looks adorable. Now, they do have acid, and they do have some kind of saliva. And they spit it out at whatever they're eating, like this bacteria here. And that bacteria is going to be broken down. It's a pretty nasty way to go. And then the fungus is just going to kind of absorb whatever's left, the nutrients, right? Nom, 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 nom. You just had a really good meal, all right? So that's basically the difference. And if you see right here where all that saliva and acid was, that's where the bacteria wouldn't start to grow. Why would you want to grow in a place where you could get absorbed, right? All right. I wouldn't. That's just my personal preference. But anyway, Dr. Flemming was like, hey, man, I got to see if this works on people. Because he's a good scientist, and good scientists test things. All right? So he found a patient with gangrene. There's the cut. And we're going to have a little bacteria grow on it. Look at that. There it is. And then he was like, let's just spread some of that mold on there, dude. And he did. And guess what? Surprisingly, his patient didn't die. I think he was just kind of desperate at this point, but the patient started to heal. Look at that. And then they got to live, and they got to go home, and everybody was happy. And nobody sued Dr. Flemming, which is amazing because this was not proven. All right, so Dr. Flemming's like, how do I get this out of Germany without the Nazis getting to it? Because this is some pretty amazing stuff. So then he was like, bruh, I know what I gotta do. I am going to sew my cultures in my lab coat instead of wearing a bulletproof vest. So there he is with his little lab coat, which still looks like a hat. Don't judge me. Hashtag not an artist. Anyway, so yeah, I just did that. It's embarrassing. Anyway, he sews his little molds into his jacket, which is apparently see-through. All right. And then he goes and gets back to his lab and nothing happens. And he's like, whoa, that totally worked. Except the reason that he never got caught or stopped was because he was a scientist and they're unassuming, and because, well, nobody really cared about it. Even when he got home, people didn't really care about penicillin. It wasn't until his sloppy lab assistant was like, guys. It was my sandwich. No, just kidding. But he did kind of bring awareness to penicillin. And once it started getting used, it saves just millions, if not billions of lives every year. You and I would probably not be here if it wouldn't have been for the discovery of penicillin. All right, so remember this guy's name. This is Dr. Alexander Flemming. All right, and he discovered the saving grace of our species, antibiotics. Look, now that is a lab coat that looks like a cape. That's much better. All right? So please remember his name and remember the sacrifice that he was willing to make for other people. And also remember his practices and his thoughts. He is literally the guardian angel of the human race.